Welcome to Storytelling. This week's guest is an author of 5 books, an award-winning educator and international presenter on the neuroscience of abuse cultures and how we can transform them. She writes a series for Psychology Today called The Bullied Brain and works with organisations to create brain-healthy, happy, high-performing cultures. Please welcome Jennifer Fraser. Hello, Jennifer, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me.
Jennifer, neuroscience often feels clinical. How do you translate complex brain science into real-world strategies people can use every day?
There's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but let's start with my training. My training is, I did a PhD in comparative literature. So we were trained to take different discourses out of their silos and we put them in the arena, and then we see how the conversation changes. And when you take neuroscience and you put it in the arena with abuse culture or all the different forms of abuse culture, you get the most stunning change in the conversation. So that's one reason. The other reason was I was in a workplace where I reported abuse and they started to lie to me. They were lying right to my face. And I depend on research. So I went and looked at the medicine, I looked at the psychology, I looked at the psychiatry, and then I hit the neuroscience. And when I saw what the brain researchers know about abuse and what I was dealing with and the falsehoods that I was being, sort of led down the garden path by, that's when I really took a deep dive into taking this science and making it absolutely practical, applicable, something that we could use as a way to say this kind of culture has got to change.
Your experience at work, when you said that you experienced bullying and other workplace issues, was that a defining moment in your career that shaped your focus in this area?
Well, what's really interesting about that is I have always been working on abuse culture. And I didn't really understand why. I mean, why are we drawn to study something or do research into something, write about something? I mean, my latest book is my 5th book. And if you go back and look at my books, they are all in one way or another about abuse culture. And it wasn't until the 4th book, where I had this issue in the workplace, that I had to open up a very sealed off, dissociated part of myself. And because of the situation I was in and what was happening, I was starting to have panic attacks. And I'd never had that before. And I didn't know what to do about it, but I kind of did. I don't even know how to explain that. It's like it was conscious and unconscious at the same time. And now that I know how the brain works, I sound like I'm very, a brain scientist, which I'm not, but I've done so much research now into what is happening in a brain that's been abused that I do understand the functionality of what was happening to me. So the bottom line is I open up this box that I have kept to the side of my desk for all my life. And inside that box is the fact that from 13 to 17, I was sexually, emotionally, and physically abused by 3 teachers at my public school in Canada. And there was a bunch of kids that were abused, of course. That's always a broken record of abuse. And these guys were taken to court in the early 2000s. And I had just kept it boxed up. I had kept it separate. It wasn't me. It wasn't who I was. I didn't ever want to look at it and deal with it. But it's been driving my work ever since I did an English degree.
Your experience is quite profound in terms of your early childhood experiences. How did this affect your brain and how can we explain it in a way that others can understand?
Well, I think what happens when you've been abused, and there's very few people that have gone through their lives without suffering abuse or trauma of one kind or another. I've never met anyone who hasn't had a traumatic event happen to them in some way, shape, or form. So what happens specifically when it's an adult to child abuse scenario, you develop all kinds of I guess you could call it brain wiring that is meant to keep you safe, first and foremost. The brain cares most about survival. It has to manage this. I'm using some of the terminology of neuroscientists, but the brain's job is to manage the body budget. It has to manage the energy in the body. It has to manage the systems, and it has to keep you alive. That's what it most cares about. And then second to that, procreation. You need to replicate yourself. And we are driven by these things. So when you've been really badly treated, manipulated, maltreated, it's easy to manipulate kids. That's why they are targeted by adults who are very dysfunctional, and they're almost always come from abuse and neglect themselves. That's why they're so psychopathic. It's almost like a virus that you pass on if you don't heal it and get it better. And lots of us don't get our brains better because we don't see them, so we ignore them. We don't know that they're hurt, so we just think that this is who we are and how we act. And we go through our lives that way. Unless we're seeing a mental health counselor of some way, shape, or form, we're not really thinking that much about how our brain is being sculpted by our experience.
And we talk about that experience because it's not even just the adult to child experience. It could be the child to child experience as well. For example, bullying. And when that manifests itself into adulthood, as it were, it appears in the workplace as well. How do organizations, for example, if they want to, identify that? And how can they shift from what is known as toxic culture to a healthy one? Where should they start?
Well, I think they need to start talking about brains. And the second you talk about the brain rather than the behavior, then you're able to sidestep the ethical, that desire to punish, that desire to say that someone is bad, that desire to scapegoat and drive people out. And that world fuels toxic culture, because if you go into a workplace and everybody sits down in the Monday morning meeting and your leader says, hey, I want everyone to make a conscious effort to leave their brain wiring that's pretty traumatic at the door. We've got a lot of work to do today. We are a team. We all know that sometimes we're going to act in ways that are embarrassing or shameful or not true to who we are. And that's okay because we have neuroplasticity. That means we can change our brains. And all of us need to work hard to make our brains healthy and happy and high performing. But if you have a leader who never speaks about the brain, doesn't know anything about the brain, doesn't understand how stress can make us behave in ways that are highly destructive, that we are mammals and that we all completely benefit from co-regulating each other's systems, which means being together, being physically connected, looking in each other's faces, meeting each other's eyes, seeing the empathy in one another, putting a hand on someone's shoulder, using a voice that is a little bit sing-songy, like we would talk to a baby or to a pet. Those are things that every workplace should know, and vast majority of workplaces never mention them.
You mentioned the term neuroplasticity. How does this help people recover or adapt? And can you provide a clear term, just in case someone might have missed what it actually really means?
Yeah. So neuroplasticity is our brain's capacity to change. And neuroplasticity is affected by what we practice. So we can go and do reps in the gym and make our muscles stronger. That's because our body has plasticity. We can see it. We can see a stronger body and we can feel it. Same thing with the brain, except we can't see it. So if we do reps in the brain gym and we strengthen the practices in our world that we want. So for example, with me, I'm the kind of person that bottles up my emotions forever, and then something will tip me off and I will be volcanic furious. Well, I don't want to be that way. That's a silly way to behave. It's much healthier to just call things out in the moment, keep your stress levels, in balance, etc. So I say to myself, I'm going to work on that. Maybe I'm the person that every time I have to confront someone, I burst into tears. Well, I don't want to be that person. I can work on that. I can get better at concentration. I can get better at working memory, peripheral vision, you name it. There's ways you can train your brain. That's neuroplasticity. Now, Debbie, where it relates so powerfully to your last question is, we all are obsessed with our own health, our own longevity. We're all working to be fit and eat the right diet and so on. But we're not thinking about environment nearly enough. Our environment impacts our health. The behaviors of other people impact our brain health and our physical health. And so this is why creating a toxic work environment is undoing all of the healthy neuroplastic things you can do for your brain because the environment is sculpting your brain in a negative direction. It's making it put way too much energy and resources into threat detection and not allowing you to be creative and problem solving and productive.
What are some general myths that people have shared with you with regards to the brain and what's keeping them stuck?
Well, one of the things that we believe in our culture, but we don't like to say out loud. So we have this kind of cognitive dissonance in our culture. And so we'll say to each other, we'll say in the workplace, we say in schools, oh, we have zero tolerance for bullying. We don't like those kinds of aggressive, destructive, manipulative behaviors. But the reality is, we actually are a society that believes abuse is a necessary evil for greatness. And so we admire abuse. We admire aggression. It's absolutely wall to wall on the internet. It's all over politics. It's everywhere. It's media. It's social media. We are bombarded in our movies, our TV shows. We are a culture that admires really destructive behavior. And so, you imagine our children growing up in a world where, on the one hand, they get in a lot of trouble if they are bullying, but they also were watching adults bullying one another and children 24/7 and getting power and prestige for it and doing it with impunity. So what do you even say to kids when that is the myth that fuels your culture? And this is, you asked me at the beginning, what am I doing with this science? Why am I trying to understand brain science? Well, the reason being is science is the best way to debunk a myth.
And debunking myths, because I think it's really important what you just shared in terms of that a lot of schools and even workplaces saying, yeah, we have zero tolerance for bullying, we have zero tolerance for XYZ, we have mental health first aiders and etc. That they tolerate the behaviours. And is there a way of getting schools and organisations away from these paper zero tolerances to actually putting them into action?
Well, when we first talked, we were talking about why is the brain so resistant? Why is the brain resistant to change?
Yeah.
And you've just talked exactly about what the issue is. Our brains normalize whatever happens frequently. They are easily led to believe that if something is repeated, something is true. If something is repeated or put in bold letters or colored font, our brain starts to believe that this, in fact, is reality. And we will do the most heinous things, the most terrible things, the most destructive things to one another if it is normalized in our culture. We've seen it in history. We're seeing it today. And the reality is those are brains that are in what the brain scientists call, they've gotten habituated. We can get habituated to bullying behaviors and think it's the only way. When we want our brains to change, they're resistant. And the reason being, if we could look into our brains, you would see two types of roads. One road is a superhighway. It's what we default to. If we are raised in a bullying culture where we watch people who are highly abusive gain in power and prestige, then we start to do these same behaviors ourselves. Well, we see our leaders of nations are liars. Okay, well, I'm going to start telling self-serving lies too, because that's what you do when you're powerful and prestigious. You tell self-serving lies. Well, the brain will habituate to that, to the point where you don't anymore get an amygdala alert. You don't get the part of the brain that says, hey, this is really risky social behavior. You're not going to be part of the tribe if you do this kind of thing. Humans don't like lying. Your brain will just stop. It'll stop saying that to you. It'll just be like, oh, you're telling a self-serving lie? Whatever. That's normal. I've habituated to it. That becomes a superhighway in the brain. Now, the resistant road is a tangled, full of stones, covered in vines. You can't even see the path. And you're asking the brain to go down that pathway to kindness and empathy and care and maybe not having as much power and prestige. Your brain is like, yeah, no, that's way too much work. I'm not going to do it. I'm going back to the superhighway because that's comfortable. It feels good and it's easy. It's the exact same thing as getting fit in the physical sense. If you've been sitting on the couch watching Netflix and eating chocolate cake, you do not want to go for a jog. Bottom line is you don't. You'd rather sit. It's comfortable. It doesn't make your body feel stressed out. It doesn't hurt your lungs. It doesn't make your muscles ache. It's so comfortable. The brain is exactly the same way. But what you can do is trailblaze that hard path. You can turn off the Netflix and go out for a 5-minute jog. You can make it 10 minutes 2 weeks later, 15, 20. Next thing you know, you don't want to miss your run because you've switched physical fitness. That's become your superhighway. You know, you feel so good when you exercise that you're not going to let anything get in the way of it. So this is what I mean about neuroplasticity. We can change what our brains literally look like, how they are physically constructed by what we practice, as well as whatever environment it is we're in.
If someone is not motivated to want to think differently, then it's even more difficult for them to train their brain to do something else. But if you were motivated and you do want to, and you want a different outcome, what would you say that the things that people need to think about doing?
Well, one of the brain studies that's really interesting is on totalitarian regimes. And when they look, I mean, in a place like North Korea, for example, they will take 2-year-olds. They will separate 2-year-olds from their parents so that they don't get to see them very often. They will put them into school systems where the entire school curriculum is built on a bullying model. So math problems will be, count up people in the West and how much they want to hurt you. Tell a short story. Oh, it's going to be about Western people and Western politics wants to steal your resources. Well, how are you going to fight back? The entire school is constructed that way. And so what happens with these brains is they become very inflexible. They've been indoctrinated and they're rigid and inflexible, and you can see it on a brain scan. So all of us want to say to ourselves, do we really want to adhere to someone else's directives on who we are and what we are and how we're going to conduct ourselves? Or do we want to make brains that are flexible and strong and plastic? And, it's literally a choice about who do you want to be, because whoever it is you want to be is going to be reflected on the brain level. So one of the things most people don't understand is when you are bullied in our society, and it's everywhere, it's normalized, it's how kids even are reflecting adult behaviors and how they maltreat each other, etc. It does physical damage to the brain. It can be seen on a brain scan. And we're not a culture. You were saying, Debbie, about, well, what should we do in the workplace? Well, Monday morning, 9 o'clock, say to everyone, hey, you know what? I don't want to see anybody bullying anybody else. If you do it, catch yourself really fast because it does physical damage to people's brains. And we're a brain trust. We're all about high productivity and profitability here. We're high flyers. We want to have brains that are on fire, doing amazing things. So we can't afford any bullying because it's going to physically hurt these powerhouse brains that we're all working with. And, it's this type of changing the language, changing the focus, getting people to talk about it. We're such a crazy culture in that we're like, oh, mental health, that's a stigma. Well, why? If you have a broken bone or a torn ACL or a heart problem, there's no stigma attached to it. The brain is just an organ in the body that we don't need to have a stigma about it. We want to, all of us, make it healthy.
What's one bold prediction you'd make about how our understanding of brain health and culture will change in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that we're going to see a switch. So all of us now are used to seeing big breakthroughs in dementia and Alzheimer's. We are reading about brain training programs that you can do that keep your brain fit as you age. Really interested in longevity these days. So people are paying attention. I predict that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be reading articles all over the news that talk about how when we use brain training, we can get our teenagers way healthier. We can stop the youth mental health crisis because our kids are doing brain training. It's strengthening all the fundamental cognitive levels of the brain and making them healthier so that our kids can navigate the really tough teen years from 13 to, or 10 really, 10 to 25. all of us undergo intensive adolescent brain development. It's when we start to see youth mental health shoot up in the numbers, and it's really serious. A ton of that could be avoided by brain training. And the brain training program is available. It's out there. It doesn't cost barely anything, and no kids are doing it. That is the change that we will see.
You mentioned dementia and Alzheimer's as well. Are there brain training exercises for people with those diseases as well?
Absolutely. The brain training program, it's the only one. It's called Brain HQ, as in brain headquarters. The lead scientist on Brain HQ, the neuroscientist, is Dr. Michael Merzenich. And he's an absolute genius. And he has a team of international neuroscientists that have developed these programs with him. They originally developed it for Alzheimer's and dementia, and it's a success story. It's unbelievable. But they got a telephone call in the lab, and it was Alex Guerrero. And Alex Guerrero is quarterback Tom Brady's trainer. And he said, hey, neuroscientist, just wanted to check in with you because you do know that Tom uses Brain HQ every day. And he wants to put it into his book, the TB12. Are you guys okay with that? And they were like, what? And that's when they realized that young people's brains, the highest performers' young people's brains, can be absolutely boosted, made fit, made more precise, made more advanced by doing the brain training. And so they went and met with Tom Brady. And then it came out in public that your Harry Kane also uses Brain HQ. So we've got top athletes using a brain training program. It keeps their brains high performing at the top level in the world in their sport. And we don't have all our kids doing it. That is really the change we need to see.
Jennifer, how does Brain HQ help with dementia?
Well, it works on a number of different levels, but I'll give you two, for example. So in the same way that as we age, we keep our bodies moving. We know we've got to keep playing tennis, we've got to get out on the bike. The brain is the same way. If we don't exercise our brains, they will atrophy, and they are hungry for learning. Our brain loves to be challenged. It loves to learn. So one of the things that they've just been able to recently show with Brain HQ is it is a booster of acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that keeps your brain cells young and healthy. And so you are literally, when you do Brain HQ, on a chemical level, you're pumping your brain full of the chemicals that is going to keep it healthier. It's going to keep it younger, sharper as you age. And it's going to protect you from things like dementia.
Is it possible for someone showing early signs to actually benefit from Brain HQ?
Absolutely. Anybody who is suffering at all with memory, working memory, the ways in which it is taking in data from the environment and it's creating a kind of fuzzy picture, it's a little bit chatty, it's a little noisy, any of that component of the brain will get sharper and stronger by doing the exercises.
Jennifer, can you share one exercise that the audience can do straight away?
Well, everybody could go right now to Brain HQ and do exercises for free. They could read all the science about it, which is right there. They can read about Tom Brady. They can read about Harry Kane. It's right there, brainhq.com. Now, what we are doing is we are taking the pretty old-fashioned looking exercises of Brain HQ and we're making them appealing to young people. So we're changing the animation, changing the look of the games so that young people get excited and want to do them. And that should be maybe a year from now, we should have that up and running. And it's really exciting because for the first time, the state of Illinois in the United States, Illinois is launching a mental health initiative where they want all kids to get screened. So we screen kids for their vision, we screen them for their ears and so on. We make sure they're healthy, but we never look at their brains. So what's really exciting is we're in conversation with Illinois. We hope this moves forward. We want to look at how mental health can be also understood as brain health. So you support the psychologists and the counselors and the psychiatrists. You support them by bringing them kids who are fit. They've got the brain fitness piece in place. It's making them feel better. It's making them empowered. They're aware that they can do a lot themselves to get their brain health up. And then the ones that are struggling, they can go and get the mental health supports that they need as well. So it's meant to be kind of a dialogue between those two worlds.
if we could give our listeners one bit of advice to protect themselves from toxic environments, what would it be?
The brain is incredibly vulnerable to people who behave in unkind or bullying or hurtful ways. If you get excluded, if someone rolls their eyes at you in a mean way when you try and share an idea, when you are put down or not invited or ignored, these kinds of things are like poison for the brain. You can't even report them. If you went at work to HR and said, every time I speak, so and so rolls his eyes, they would just look at you like, and what do you want us to do about it? Or you went to HR and said, I just got this new promotion and they didn't even introduce me to the team. HR would be like, well, that's, maybe they misunderstood. So we live in a society, my point being, we live in a society that minimizes, that denies, dismisses these kinds of behaviors, and they're toxic for the brain. The brain flourishes when you are kind and caring and empathic and try to connect and really understand how the empathy neural networks work. They're complex. That is the kind of environment that is going to allow you to fulfill your potential.
Jennifer, I think that's a really great advice. And as we know, that the brain is, you described it as a highway system, but it's our, at the core of our central nervous system completely. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your experience and to really educate us. And thank you for being a guest on this podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you would like further details about Jennifer, then please follow links in the show notes.